In the winter of 1299, a Mongol army under Qutlugh Khwaja swept down toward Delhi, the beating heart of northern India. They'd already crushed kingdoms from Persia to Transoxiana, and now nothing seemed to stand between them and one of the richest cities in the world. Even the Sultan's advisors urged him to retreat behind the city walls and hope the storm would pass. But Sultan Alauddin Khalji had something no other ruler in the region had ever tried before. When the two forces met at Kili, just a few miles from the city, the Mongols struck first fast as always. But this time, they hit a system that didn't break. Delhi's army held its ground, countered with precision, and for the first time in India's history, shattered the illusion that the Mongols were unstoppable. Most people today remember the elephants, the banners, the clash of cavalry, but Delhi's true secret weapon wasn't on the battlefield at all. Welcome to Great History, where we uncover the hidden systems, decisions, and moments that changed the course of empires. If you love stories of strategy and power, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of history lovers. So let's ask, how did Delhi's paper weapon defeat the most mobile army on Earth? Why did the Mongols, masters of speed and surprise, finally falter here? And what made this one battle reshape India's entire idea of power? Let's find out. The relationship between the Delhi Sultanate and the Mongols didn't start with open war. It started way back in the 1220s, almost by accident, when Genghis Khan was chasing a fleeing Khwarezmian prince across Central Asia. That prince ran south, all the way to the borders of India. That's how the Mongols and the Delhi Sultanate first brushed up against each other. For decades, nothing major really happened. The Mongols had other things to worry about, conquering China, Persia, and pretty much everything else in their path. It wasn't until the late 13th century that the real danger appeared. And this time, it came from the Chagatai Khanate, one of the four successor states that had split from the empire of Genghis Khan's sons. The Chagatai found themselves boxed in, surrounded by the Golden Horde in the west, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. There was only one direction left to expand, south, into the Indian subcontinent. And that's when Delhi's troubles truly began. Before the famous Khilji dynasty took over, Sultan Ghiyas-ud-Din Balban had already seen what was coming. He wasn't one to wait around for invaders to cross the border. Instead, he built what he called a frontier defense of blood and iron. A chain of fortresses stretching along the Beas River, that's northwestern India, manned, supplied, and ready for war. It was the medieval equivalent of a fortified wall designed to stop nomadic invasions. And it worked, but at a terrible price. In 1285, the Mongols tested these defenses at the Battle of the Beas River. Delhi's troops managed to push them back, but victory didn't come cheap. Balban's own son, Prince Muhammad, died in that battle. His loss was not just a personal tragedy. It was a stark reminder that holding the Mongols at bay would always come with a cost. Then came the Khilji dynasty, and things only escalated. Sultan Jalal al-Din Khalji had to deal with another Mongol incursion in 1292, and while he managed to repel it, the attacks didn't stop. Between 1296 and 1297, the Chagatai Khanate launched more raids, and these weren't just border skirmishes. Something was changing in their intent. That change became clear in 1299. The Mongol commander Qutlugh Khwaja, a veteran of Central Asian campaigns, led a massive army straight toward Delhi. And this time, it wasn't a quick raid or a punitive expedition. It was an invasion aimed at conquest. They wanted to take and rule Delhi itself. You can tell from their tactics. Instead of wasting time attacking smaller towns or fortified outposts, they bypassed them entirely and went for the heart, the capital, It was the Mongol way: strike hard, strike fast, and break the will of your enemy before they even realize what's happening. But there was something they didn't count on. The constant pressure from Mongol warfare in Central Asia had pushed waves of refugees, soldiers, craftsmen, and even families southward. Many of them ended up in Delhi, which was not only one of the largest Muslim centers in Asia, but also one of the safest. Among those who came were battle-hardened cavalrymen and archers who had fought the Mongols before. Think about that. Men who had literally survived fighting the world's greatest horsemen were now offering their swords to the Sultan of Delhi. This changed everything. The Delhi army became more than just a regional force. It became something that could match the Mongols, man for man, horse for horse, arrow for arrow. So when Alauddin Khalji took the throne, he didn't just inherit a kingdom. He inherited a ready-made army with experience fighting the exact enemy that threatened him most. That was his secret advantage, and he built on it. But that kind of army, large, professional, and always ready, costs a fortune. Feeding thousands of soldiers, maintaining horses, supplying arrows, armor, pay, it could bankrupt a sultanate in months. So Alauddin did something bold, militarized his entire administration. It all started with a simple idea: central control. Before Alauddin, earlier sultans had relied heavily on provincial nobles and landholders, men who commanded their own local armies and collected taxes from their districts, what they called iktas. Technically, they served the sultan, but in practice, they often acted like little kings. When the Mongols threatened the frontier, these nobles might or might not answer the call, depending on how loyal or ambitious they were. Alauddin wanted none of that. He was determined to free the throne from the grip of these powerful military aristocrats. So he did something revolutionary. He built a standing army, a full-time, centrally controlled force that answered only to him. That may sound normal today, but for the 13th century, it was almost unheard of in India. Imagine tens of thousands of professional soldiers, cavalrymen, infantry, and even war elephants, all paid directly by the state, all trained and ready to move at a moment's notice. No more waiting for local lords to send their troops. No more excuses. And here's the clever part. Instead of paying them in land, Alauddin paid them in cash. That meant soldiers were loyal to their paymaster, not to any regional noble. It also killed off a lot of corruption that came with land grants and local favoritism. Overnight, it shifted the balance of power squarely back to Delhi. But paying a huge army in silver every month created a new problem. How do you make sure every coin buys real strength? How do you stop people from cheating the system? That's where Alauddin's genius for organization kicked in. He introduced two systems that honestly sound almost modern: the dog and the chehra. The dog, literally branding, was a way to mark every horse in the royal stables. Each horse got an official mark. These commanders had a nasty habit of claiming pay for top-quality horses while actually bringing weak or untrained ones into service. It was a classic scam, and it cost the state a fortune. With dog, that stopped. Only verified, battle-ready horses could serve. It sounds bureaucratic, but it completely transformed the cavalry's effectiveness. Cavalry was the backbone of medieval warfare, especially when you were facing the Mongols, who were the greatest horsemen the world had ever seen. By keeping his horses healthy, strong, and standardized, Alauddin ensured his riders could actually match Mongol mobility and endurance. Then came the chehra system, literally face. Every soldier's physical description was recorded: height, build, scars, complexion, even distinctive marks. It was like having an early photo ID. Why go to all that trouble? Because some commanders would try to inflate their numbers by enrolling fake names or swapping in untrained substitutes. With Chera, every man could be verified. It was an anti-corruption tool and a way to make sure that the paper army matched the real one standing on the field. So what you had by the end of these reforms was an army that was real. Every horse, every man, every sword was accounted for. And that gave Alauddin something no Indian ruler had before, a force he could truly trust. The cavalry dominated, but there were also disciplined ranks of infantry and elephants. Even within the cavalry, they had two distinct classes, the Ek Aspa, who maintained one horse, and the Do Aspa, who kept two. That second horse was the secret to long-distance endurance. When one was exhausted, the rider could switch. It gave them a level of mobility that started to close the gap with the Mongols' legendary speed. Alauddin turned economic control into military logistics. He fought wars not only with swords and horses, but with grain prices and ledgers. And that's what made his system so remarkable. Let's start with the basic problem. Alauddin commanded one of the largest standing armies in medieval India, tens of thousands of professional soldiers, and hundreds of elephants. Now here's the paradox. How do you keep such a massive force fed, armed, and loyal without bankrupting your treasury? Alauddin came up with a counterintuitive solution. He deliberately kept soldiers' salaries low, much lower than what earlier sultans had paid. On paper, this sounds harsh, even impossible. But the man had a plan. He realized that it didn't matter how much you paid your men in silver if the price of bread kept rising. So instead of raising wages, he decided to control the cost of living itself. That's where his famous market regulations, known as the Diwan-i-Riyasat, came in. He fixed maximum prices, price ceilings, on almost every essential good you could imagine. Grains, vegetables, meat, cloth, even horses. The idea was simple but brilliant. If the price of food and supplies stayed low, then even a modest salary could go a long way. Soldiers could feed their families, support themselves, and remain loyal without draining the state's coffers. Imagine you're a cavalryman earning just enough to get by. Normally, during wartime, prices for grain or fodder would skyrocket, and your pay wouldn't stretch far enough. But under Alauddin, the price of wheat was fixed. It didn't matter if the monsoon failed or if traders tried to hoard stock. The state stepped in and froze prices. Even a small paycheck could keep you comfortable. That economic stability became a strategic advantage. Alauddin could plan military campaigns with confidence because he knew exactly how much it would cost to feed and supply his troops. Month after month, year after year. No inflation, no unexpected shortages, no merchant manipulation, and he made sure of that. Traders caught hoarding or price gouging faced severe punishment. The Sultan's officials inspected markets, audited warehouses, and enforced penalties without mercy. He even took it further. The government itself began stockpiling grain in massive state granaries. These were part of a system. During shortages, the state could release grain into the market to stabilize prices. During plenty, it could buy up surplus to prevent inflation. Soldiers, by the way, were exempt from ration limits. The army always ate first. What Alauddin built, in effect, was an early state-controlled supply chain. By centralizing resources, Alauddin could afford to sustain large-scale defenses for extended periods. The Mongols, by contrast, couldn't. Their armies thrived on fast-moving raids and local foraging. They needed open pasture for their horses and quick victories to resupply. But when they reached northern India, something changed. The lush grasslands they expected to find were gone. The fertile zones were either stripped bare or tightly controlled by the Sultan's own supply system. The Mongol horses, the heart of their mobility, began to starve. They had stumbled into what you might call a resource denial trap. Everywhere they went, the granaries belonged to the Sultan. The fodder fields were already harvested. The villages had been evacuated or placed under state control. In short, the Mongols had no way to live off the land. They were forced into a drawn-out logistical struggle, something their entire system was never built for. Rumors are spreading that the Mongols, led by Qutlugh Khwaja and his commander Timur Buka, have crossed the frontier and are setting up camp just 10 kilometers from the capital at a place called Kili. That's basically a morning ride away. Instead of retreating behind his fortress walls like his advisors begged him to, Alauddin decides to face the Mongols in open battle. Kili wasn't just about defense. It was about proving that his new centralized war machine actually worked. If he backed down now, the entire system, the low-salary, price-controlled, tax-efficient army he'd built, would look like a failure. So he gathers what modern historians estimate to be around 70,000 troops and a staggering 700 war elephants. The Mongols, probably about 50,000 to 60,000 strong, smaller, but battle-hardened and terrifyingly fast. That's enormous for the period. That was a serious attempt to test Delhi's strength. The way Alauddin organized his army was what really set him apart. He divided his troops into 5 disciplined divisions, almost like a machine with 5 coordinated parts, each designed for a specific task. On the left wing was Nusrat Khan. On the right wing stood Hizabruddin Zafar Khan. At the center, commanding the heart of the army, was Alauddin himself. The vanguard, the front line that would meet the first clash, was led by Akat Khan, and in reserve, placed wisely behind the left flank, was Ulugh Khan, ready to reinforce any weak point or turn the tide when needed. That last decision, placing his reserves behind the potentially weaker side, says everything about Alauddin's mind as a commander. He used elephants not just as weapons, but as living fortifications. Each division of cavalry was backed by a line of armored war elephants, behind which stood infantry armed with spears, bows, and swords. If you picture that, a living wall of elephants shielding rows of soldiers, you can see how that would completely disrupt the Mongols' usual style of warfare. Their strength was in their mobility, their ability to encircle and strike fast. But here at Kili, they couldn't maneuver. Alauddin had chosen his battlefield perfectly. One side was bordered by a dense forest, the other by the Yamuna River, a natural choke point. The Mongols, who relied on wide open plains to surround and outflank their enemies, were boxed in. Their legendary sweeping cavalry maneuvers had nowhere to go. Alauddin wasn't just defending Delhi, he was defending his entire system. His choice to stand and fight was political, economic, and military all at once. The fight at Kili was mainly a cavalry showdown, which made perfect sense. Both armies relied heavily on horsemen. But the way each side used those horsemen couldn't have been more different. Alauddin's cavalry was a mixed arms force, which means it wasn't just a mass of riders charging straight ahead. It was an integration of mounted archers who could strike from a distance and lancers who specialized in close combat. And here's the fascinating part. Delhi's lancers were actually better equipped for hand-to-hand fighting than their Mongol counterparts. They had heavier armor and longer spears, which gave them the edge in a direct clash. But of course, the Mongols didn't like direct clashes. They preferred deception, and at Kili, they played one of their oldest and deadliest tricks, the feigned retreat. One of Alauddin's bravest commanders, Zafar Khan, fell right into it. The Mongol general Qutlugh pulled his troops back in what looked like a retreat. Zafar Khan, driven by pure courage and maybe a touch of pride, took the bait. Without waiting for Alauddin's orders, he charged forward, chasing the retreating Mongols for 18 kos. That's roughly 35 miles, or about an hour's drive today. And then, just like that, the trap closed. The Mongols wheeled around and ambushed him. Zafar Khan and his men fought ferociously. They inflicted heavy Mongol casualties, but they were completely surrounded. When it was over, Zafar Khan was dead. You might think Alauddin would honor Zafar Khan as a martyr. But he didn't, at least not publicly. He actually condemned Zafar Khan's disobedience. This wasn't about personal heroics, it was about discipline. His new army wasn't built on feudal glory or impulsive courage. It was built on obedience, organization, and control. A single commander breaking ranks could jeopardize the entire structure. Zafar Khan's reckless pursuit had nearly opened the flank and exposed the rest of the army. Alauddin needed everyone, from the top general to the newest recruit, to understand that the survival of Delhi depended on order, not individual valor. And that's what makes this moment so telling. The Delhi Sultanate's real weapon wasn't the sword or the elephant. It was its ability to stay cohesive under chaos. Now here's where Alauddin's brilliance shows. Even after losing one of his top commanders, he didn't panic. His central command stayed intact, his reserves stayed in position, and his formations held their ground. When the Mongol commander Qutlugh Khwaja saw Zafar Khan's division wiped out, he thought this was his moment. He struck hard at the center of Alauddin's army, trying to break the line before Delhi's troops could regroup, but his flanks weren't in sync. The Mongol wings couldn't advance fast enough, leaving the center exposed. That's when Qutlugh Khan, who commanded Alauddin's reserve force, moved in from the left. Remember how Alauddin had placed his reserves behind the weaker flank? This was exactly why. Qutlugh Khan swung in and hit the Mongol center from the side, turning their momentum against them. The battle raged for several days, but the combined effect of Delhi's numerical advantage, its mixed weapon formations, and Alauddin's tight command structure began to show. The Mongols were bleeding men, horses, and, most importantly, morale. And then came the breaking point. Qutlugh Khwaja was wounded, possibly fatally. Some sources say he died shortly after the battle. Once that happened, the Mongol chain of command fell apart. Without a clear leader and with their supplies running thin, they began to withdraw. Kili didn't end Mongol invasions for good. They'd be back in later years. But it did something far more lasting. It shattered the myth of Mongol invincibility in India. For the first time, the Mongols had met an organized state that could fight on equal terms, not through luck or raw strength, but through planning. The victory at Kili proved that Alauddin's system worked, but history rarely gives anyone time to rest on success. Just 4 years later, in October 1303, the Mongols returned, this time under the command of Taragai, and they caught Delhi at its weakest. The Sultan's main armies were scattered. One was still dragging itself home after the long and costly siege of Chittor, while another was marching south toward Warangal in the Deccan. That meant Delhi, for once, stood almost defenseless. Alauddin rushed back to the capital, riding hard, pushing through exhaustion. But when he arrived, his situation was grim. The monsoon rains had damaged weapons and armor. Horses had died or gone lame on the hard march from Rajasthan. Even basic supplies were short. The empire that had stood tall at Kili now faced an enemy at the gates, with almost nothing ready for war. The Mongols, under Taragai, took full advantage. They crossed into India and camped alarmingly close within just 10 kilometers, around 6 miles of Delhi itself. Panic spread through the city like wildfire. Prices soared, people fled the outskirts, and all eyes turned to the Sultan for a miracle. But Alauddin didn't have an army ready for battle. So instead of facing the Mongols in the open, he made a completely different choice, one that would test the endurance of his new system to its core. Unable to fight a pitched battle, Alauddin withdrew into a fortified camp at Siri, a new fort that was still under construction. But location mattered more than perfection. Siri sat in a naturally defensible position, protected on three sides by the Yamuna River, dense forest, and the old city of Delhi itself. The vulnerable northern side, however, was wide open. To fix that, Alauddin's men dug a deep moat, then hastily reinforced it with a wooden palisade. They even ripped doors and beams from Delhi's homes to build it. This improvised wall became the first line of defense against Mongol cavalry. Behind that barrier, Alauddin stationed his core forces soldiers armed with spears and bows, shielded by a line of 5 heavily armored war elephants at the front. These elephants weren't just symbolic. They were literal, moving walls, capable of trampling cavalry and breaking charges. The Mongols, who relied on lightning-fast maneuvers and open-field fighting, suddenly found themselves facing an obstacle course instead of an easy conquest. Taragai's forces surrounded Delhi for over 2 months. They looted the outskirts, burned villages, and tried to provoke Alauddin into coming out and fighting. But he refused. He stayed inside Siri, calm and calculating, letting time become his weapon. Here's the things. The Chagatai Mongols were not siege specialists. They didn't have siege engines like catapults or battering rams, nor the engineers needed to operate them. But Alauddin had already stripped the surrounding countryside of food, fodder, and supplies in earlier campaigns. There was nothing for the Mongols to live off. So as weeks passed, their horses began to starve. Their troops weakened. Disease and exhaustion crept in. By the end of 2 months, they simply couldn't maintain the siege. The same Mongol army that had once crushed kingdoms across Asia was now forced to retreat, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they couldn't outlast the system Alauddin had built. After the siege, Alauddin took stock. Yes, Delhi had survived, but barely. He realized that relying on improvised defenses, no matter how clever, was too risky. So he doubled down on fortifying the empire. The Siri fort was completed and strengthened, becoming a permanent defensive stronghold. Alauddin also created a dedicated frontier army, a full-time force assigned solely to guard the northwestern borders from Mongol incursions. A new governor was put in charge of this defense system, ensuring that future invasions would be met long before they reached Delhi's gates. The Mongols never again came close to conquering northern India. Thanks for staying till the end, my friend. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how Delhi outsmarted the Mongols, don't forget to like, share, and tell me what you think in the comments. And of course, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you tomorrow with another story from the past that changed the world in ways most people never realized.